Okay, we've got one more to join and
I got,
everybody should come in.
I just clicked him in. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to this 41st webinar on the Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. This webinar series is available on makara.us under the subheadings Moria Federation webinars, then webinar series in progress as shown here. I think this is still up to date, isn't it, BL? See, we have here the only other one going is Nicole Recintes, and I think that's ongoing. Isn't that correct?
It is ongoing. We don't have the updates as much as we should have on that one, but they're also on YouTube. So,
Okay.
and there's a link there. But yes, these are the only ongoing ones right now. So,
Okay. So this webinar series is available on no, excuse me. Previous episodes of this, the Secret Doctrine and the Treatise on Cosmic Fire series are also available on YouTube. Just do a search for Francis Donald and the webinar you wish to view. You can register for any of these webinars on the homepage of moriafederation.com. They're up here in the upper left-hand corner. Okay, during our last session, we took a look at a map of the interior of the Great Pyramid that occurs in the book and read about its 4 chambers and many passages. We then considered evidence suggesting that the Great Pyramid's age is far older than is accepted by all but a few modern Egyptologists. We looked at a story suggesting that Caliph al-Mamun breached and looted the Great Pyramid, and at a more likely theory that the quote-unquote forced passage was created in ancient times. We were introduced to great 19th century personalities like Charles Piazzi Smythe, who spent years measuring every angle and dimension of the Great Pyramid, and W.W. Harmon, whose research determined that the pyramid was perfectly aligned with the star Vega somewhere around 69,000 years ago. Both Harmon and MPH consider this ancient date to be a likely one for the pyramid's construction. We then looked at sidereal mechanics, the symbolic use of limestone and granite, the so-called air vents, the well, the astonishing level of precision in the Great Pyramid's construction, including its placement as regards the cardinal points, and finally at the fact that through the height and circumference at its base, the Great Pyramid squares the circle, a metaphor for the balance of spirit and form. This alone suggests that there is intrinsic meaning to the measurements within the pyramid and that they were intended by those who built it. So this brings us to where we left off. During this section of the text, which we'll be reading today, MPH is uncharacteristically oriented toward the Great Pyramid's physical attributes, which lays the foundation for an upcoming section entitled The Pyramid Mysteries. So with that, let's start off. Can we get a reader, please?
sure, I'll start off. Attention is called to the granite plugs filling the ascending passageway to the Queen's chamber, which Caliph al-Mamun was forced practically to pulverize before he could clear a way into the upper chambers. C. Piazzi Smythe notes that the positions of the stones demonstrate that they were set in place from above, which make it necessary for a considerable number of workmen to depart from the upper chambers. How did they do it? Smythe believes they descended through the well, see the diagram, dropping from the ramp dropping the ramp stone into place behind them. He further contends that robbers probably used the well as a means of getting into the upper chambers. The ramp stone having been set in a bed of plaster, the robbers were forced to break through it, leaving a jagged opening. Mr. Dupree, an architect who has spent years investigating the pyramids, differs from Smythe, however, in that he believes the well itself to be a robber's hole, being the first successful attempt made to enter the upper chambers from the subterranean chamber, then the only open section of the pyramid.
Okay, thanks, Beal. So first up, attention is called to the granite plugs filling the ascending passageway to the Queen's Chamber, which Caliph al-Mamun was forced practically to pulverize before he could clear way into the upper chambers. Okay, the Great Pyramid has two distinct tunnel systems, a lower and an upper as shown here. The lower corresponds to those found in other pyramids, like its neighbor Khafre and Menkaure, shown here in the bottom two illustrations, while the upper, which was carefully hidden and perhaps survived in violet much longer, is unique to the Great Pyramid. There are no other pyramids that have any upper chambers. The photo at left shows the juncture of these two passages, the down passage and the upward passage. With the ascending passage, which you see here, blocked by the lowest of three large granite plugs. And this is what the plug looks like, right? To get around this plug, Caliph al-Mamun's men supposedly dug what's called the forced passage, this tunnel, which is here shown in red. I say supposedly because research since MPH wrote The Secret Teachings has unearthed a number of facts that make it unlikely that the Caliph's men dug this passage. Most convincing among these is the fact that the Caliph was in Egypt for the specific purpose of quelling an uprising of Coptic Christians, which he successfully did, and then left after only 47 days. That he also found time to dig a 40-meter passage through solid limestone into the side of the Great Pyramid is, well, highly improbable. There is also evidence that the looters had at least some idea of the overall layout of the interior of the pyramid. For example, they knew not to take on the bottom granite plug shown here because they knew that this plug would be quite long. In fact, its 3 consecutive plugs measure over 15 feet of solid granite. So instead, they continued down the descending passage to a spot that they thought would be beyond the plugs, and then dug their way up 4 meters through much easier, through limestone instead of through granite, finally into the ascending passage as shown in red. Here's a picture of that part of their digging. Okay, next up, C. Piazzi Smythe notes that the positions of the stones demonstrate that they were set in place from above, which made it necessary for a considerable number of workmen to depart from the upper chambers. How did they do it? Smythe believes they descended through the well, see diagram, dropping the ramp stone into place behind them. So here's the so-called well shaft, a detail from this, which connects the ascending passage to the descending passage, right? It is, of course, closed to the public, this well, unlit, and thus rarely photographed. But a close examination of the upper part of the well shaft suggests that exiting workmen could not have, quote unquote, dropped the ramp stone in place behind them because the work area was so small and the stone, shown here in red, weighing around 3,000 pounds, would have been way more than two people could have lowered into place. So escape through the well would have required at least one or more of two workmen to have lowered this massive stone from below with the 1.5-ton stone up over their head. In fact, the idea that the well shaft was dug as an escape route has many flaws, not least of which is the fact that the shaft is much longer than necessary. If its sole purpose was to be a one-way escape route, a hypothetical route here shown in green, would have been much easier to excavate. Also, the well shaft is, from many accounts, not at all difficult to climb, providing many handholds and footholds. So again, if the builders wanted to make the pyramid hard to plunder, it would have made much more sense to build a vertical shaft, like the column in blue here, then lower themselves by rope and, maybe light the rope on fire, thus leaving behind this formidable vertical challenge for would-be plunderers. Next up, Piazzi further contends that robbers probably used the well as a means of getting into the upper chambers. The ramp stone having been set in a bed of plaster, the robbers were forced to break through it, leaving a jagged opening. Well, actually, the damage to the ramp stone that sealed the well shaft suggests that it was disfigured and broken, apparently with large hammers, from above, not from below. Again, making it unlikely that looters dug and came up this shaft. But, that's what was believed in 1926 when Manly P. Hall wrote A Secret Teachings. And actually, this belief is, even in spite of the evidence, still carries on today. Next, Mr. Dupre, an architect who has spent years investigating the pyramids, differs from Smythe, however, in that he believes the well itself to be a robber's hole, being the first successful attempt made to enter the upper chambers from the subterranean chamber. Then the only open section of the pyramid. Well, as before stated, all evidence points to the well shaft being broken into from above, not dug up from below. Also, parts of the tunnel are sheathed in well-fitted limestone blocks. Hardly an activity robbers would, be interested in doing. And second, there is a precisely engineered 90-degree right angle bend near the top of the shaft, which the robbers would have absolutely no reason to construct. I mean, does this look like, a hastily dug out shaft to connect to the upper part? It doesn't to me. Next up, could we get a reader, please? Oh, by the way, anytime you have any questions, thoughts, alternate theories, just jump in, okay? So,
Karen, can you read that for us, please?
Did you say Karen?
mhm.
Yes, please.
Okay. Mr. Dupre bases his conclusion upon the fact that the well is merely a rough hole and the grotto an irregular chamber without any evidence of the architectural precision with which the remainder of the structure was erected. The diameter of the well also precludes the possibility of its having been dug downward. It must have been gouged out from below, and the grotto was necessary to supply air to the thieves. It is inconceivable that the pyramid builders would break one of their own ramp stones and leave its broken surfaces and a gaping hole in the side wall of their otherwise perfect gallery. If the well is a robber's hole, it may explain why the pyramid was empty when Caliph al-Ma'mun entered it and what happened to the missing coffer lid. A careful examination of the so-called unfinished subterranean chamber, which must have been the base of operations for the robbers, might disclose traces of their presence or show where they piled the rubble, which must have accumulated as a result of their operations. While it is not entirely clear by what entrance the robbers reached the subterranean chamber, it is improbable that they used the descending passageway.
Thanks, Karen. Okay, first, Mr. Dupre bases his conclusion upon the fact that the well is merely a rough hole and the grotto an irregular chamber without any evidence of the architectural precision with which the remainder of the structure was erected. This is true. The well is roughly hewn for much, but not all of its length as just shown. Given the perfect alignment and finished work of the rooms and passages, it does seem unlikely that this shaft was part of the original design. This just heightens the mystery. Next, the diameter of the well also precludes the possibility of it having been dug downward. It must have been gouged out from below, and the grotto was necessary to supply air to the thieves. There are so many holes in this idea. So we've looked at evidence that suggests just the opposite, that it was dug from above, not from below. Here's another reason for this conclusion. If this shaft was dug in order to loot the upper chambers, why does the projected path of the well shaft, shown here, right? Why does the projected path of the well shaft, had it continued at its 40-degree down angle, exactly align with the bottom juncture of the descending passage? How could robbers create such an alignment? And why would robbers concern themselves with such precision? Next, it is inconceivable that the pyramid builders would break one of their own ramp stones and leave its broken surface and a gaping hole in the side of the otherwise perfect gallery. This is certainly true. The breaking of the stone had to have happened at a later date. But since it was broken into from above, it is more likely that the would-be robbers, whether or not they found the upper chambers empty, would have been searching for loot in the well shaft, not digging the well shaft to break into the upper chambers. Next, if the well is a robber's hole, it may explain why the pyramid was empty when Caliph al-Ma'mun entered it and what happened to the missing coffer lid. As mentioned before, it is improbable that Caliph al-Ma'mun had anything to do with looting the pyramid. Also, if the king's chamber had been used for initiation, there may have never been a lid to the sarcophagus, or if there was one, it could have been a much lighter ceremonial lid that could easily have been taken on and off. So it could be used in a hypothetical ceremonial death and second birth initiation ritual. Next, a careful examination of the so-called unfinished subterranean chamber, which must have been the base of operation for the robbers, might disclose traces of their presence or show where they piled the rubble, which must have accumulated as a result of their operations. Again, you see the limited amount of information that MPH had to work with. Now they have photos of all of this. As you can see from these photos, there is no great pile of rubble in the subterranean chamber. If rubble was ever stored there, it would have almost certainly been removed when the lower passage was reopened just a few centuries ago. And finally, while it's not entirely clear by what entrance the robbers reached the subterranean chamber, it is improbable that they used the descending passageway. This is a very peculiar statement, given that MPH's entire hypothesis, and I have to add that the belief of his time is based on the robbers digging up from this descending passage. So anyway, but MPH is right in saying that it is improbable that robbers used the descending passage, since it was purposely filled with sand, probably by those who closed the pyramid, and was not excavated until relatively modern times. By the way, the only other way into the subterranean chamber is the well shaft. So this all may be bewildering, at this first go through, and essentially it doesn't matter from a philosophical point of view. But we're just a couple of paragraphs from in finishing this section, which MPH, for reasons known only to him, decided to explore in depth. But if you have any thoughts or questions, please let me know. Next up, there is a remarkable niche in the north wall of the, hang on a sec. Right. Okay, there's a remarkable, wait a minute, this is the reading. I got this out of order, sorry. So could we get a reader, please?
Okay. Martha G, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. There's a remarkable niche in the north wall of the Queen's Chamber, which the Mohammedan guides glibly pronounce to be a shrine. The general shape of this niche, however, with its walls converging by a series of overlaps, like those of the Grand Gallery, would indicate that originally it had been intended as a passageway. Efforts made to explore this niche have been non-productive, but Mr. Dupre believes an entrance to exist here through which, if the well did not exist at the time, the workmen made their exit from the pyramid after dropping the stone plugs into the ascending gallery. Biblical scholars have contributed a number of most extraordinary conceptions regarding the Great Pyramid. This ancient edifice has been identified by them as Joseph's granary, despite its hopelessly inadequate capacity. As the tomb prepared for the unfortunate pharaoh of the Exodus, who could not be buried there because his body was never recovered from the Red Sea. And finally, as a perpetual confirmation of the infallibility of the numerous prophecies contained in the authorized version.
Thank you, Martha. Okay, first, there's a remarkable niche in the north wall of the Queen's Chamber, which the Mohammedan guides glibly pronounce to be a shrine. The general shape of this niche, however, with its walls converging by a series of overlaps, like those of the Grand Gallery, would indicate that originally it had been intended as a passageway. So here's the niche in the Queen's Chamber, which, as MPH observes, is built in the overlapping stone style of the Grand Gallery, here shown on the right, which has proved to be an effective method of dealing with the tremendous weight bearing down on those chambers. Perhaps the niche was intended as a passage, but just as likely it was created as a false door into a more causal dimension, like those found in the mini mastabas all through Egypt. Next, efforts made to explore this niche have been non-productive, but Mr. Dupre believes an entrance to exist here through which, if the well did not exist at the time, the workmen made their exit from the pyramid after dropping the stone plugs into the ascending gallery. Well, this has been completely disproved. We now have the ability to sonically determine if there's any negative spaces within the pyramid. There's nothing beyond this niche that suggests that anything was dug further. And, it seems to me unlikely that workmen of that time would have desecrated one of the two central chambers of the Grand Gallery, of the Great Pyramid, by digging an escape route, right through this central arched feature. And then this paragraph on biblical scholars and these ideas that it was a granary, and that it was bearing the bearing site of this Pharaoh of the Exodus, and then finally, as a perpetual confirmation of the infallibility of the numerous prophecies contained in the Authorized Version, meaning, of course, the Bible. We'll let this last paragraph stand on its own, except to say that co-opting the Great Pyramid is still a pastime of biblical scholars. Here's an example from blueletter.org. It's currently posted, and it says, "The Great Pyramid is the only form of building that conforms to the symbolic description of the spiritual building spoken of in Scripture, of which the Christ is said to be the chief cornerstone." It's not philosophically wrong in this sense, but it takes a different understanding of the Christ idea in order for it to be to apply. And that finishes the first section on the Great Pyramid, which we started a couple of webinars ago, and which mostly focuses on its age and physical properties. After his section on the Sphinx, MPH shifts from an exo to an esoteric perspective and explores the Great Pyramid as a chamber of initiation, as well as the meaning behind its numbers and geometry. But first, let's take a look at the Sphinx, beginning with this illustration on page 41. Could we get a reader, please?
I'm sure glad you put up that next slide, because there was no way
Oh, no,
anybody
no.
was going to read that last one. Vivian, can you read this, please?
The Egyptian Sphinx is closely related to the Greek legend of Oedipus, who first solved the famous riddle propounded by the mysterious creature with the body of a winged lion and the head of a woman, which frequented the highway leading to Thebes. To each who passed her lair, the Sphinx addressed the question, "What animal is it that in the morning goes on 4 feet, at noon on 2 feet, and in the evening on 3 feet?" Those who failed to answer her riddle, she destroyed. Oedipus declared the answer to be man himself, who in childhood crawled upon his hands and knees, in manhood stood erect, and in old age shuffled along, supporting himself by a staff. Discovering one who knew the answer to her riddle, the Sphinx cast herself from the cliff which bordered the road and perished. There is still another answer to the riddle of the Sphinx, an answer best revealed by a consideration of the Pythagorean values of numbers. The 4, the 2, and the 3 produce the sum of 9, which is the natural number of man and also of the lower worlds. The 4 represents the ignorant man, the 2 the intellectual man, and the 3 the spiritual man. Infant humanity walks on 4 legs, evolving humanity on 2 legs, and to the power of his own mind, the redeemed and illumined Megas adds the staff of wisdom. The Sphinx is therefore the mystery of nature, the embodiment of the secret doctrine, and all who cannot solve her riddle perish. To pass the Sphinx is to attain personal immortality.
Thank you, Vivian. Okay. Oedipus's meeting with the Sphinx is just one incident in a much longer and more involved allegory. You know, we're really back into Greek mythology with this meeting between Oedipus and the Sphinx. But before getting into some of this story's potential deeper meanings, let's take a look at a more complete version of the story. It'll help us with perspective. Could we get a reader, please?
Pia, can you read that for us, please?
Sure. Well, according to one version of the story, Laius, king of Thebes, was warned by an oracle that his son would slay him. Accordingly, when his wife, Jocasta, bore a son, he had the baby exposed on a Cithaeron. A shepherd took pity on the infant, who was adopted by King Polybus of Corinth and his wife, and was brought up as their son. In early manhood, Oedipus visited Delphi, and upon learning that he was fated to kill his father and marry his mother, he resolved never to return to Corinth. Traveling toward Thebes, he encountered Laius, his father, who provoked a quarrel in which Oedipus killed him. Continuing on his way, Oedipus found Thebes plagued by the Sphinx, who put a riddle to all passers-by and destroyed those who could not answer. Oedipus solved the riddle, and the Sphinx killed herself. In reward, he received the throne of Thebes and the hand of the widowed queen, his mother, Jocasta. They had 4 children, Eteocles, Polynices, Antigone, and Ismene. Later, when the truth became known, Jocasta committed suicide, and Oedipus, after blinding himself, went into exile, accompanied by Antigone and Ismene.
So any thoughts or questions about this? You know, the story of Oedipus is known probably more for the fact that he unwittingly married his mother. And then next, this meeting of the Sphinx on the road to Thebes. So next, we have, wait a minute here, I'm getting ahead of myself. So first of all, we have Curtis's Key of Destiny, who sees in the Hangman Arcanum a relation to the story of Oedipus. This gives us real insight into some meaning of this story. Can we get a reader, please?
Mary, can you read that for us, please? I don't see you unmuting yourself.
Yes.
There you go. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. This tarot card also agrees with the symbology of the myth of Oedipus, who was given by his father into the hands of herdsmen with orders for him to be destroyed. The herdsmen were moved with pity, yet not daring to disobey, they tied the child by one foot to an overhanging branch of a tree. Oedipus represents the personality which the father seeks not to destroy, but to send forth into conditions far from his real home, that he may be succored and nourished by nature. While the treatment seems cruel, yet through it Oedipus learned to stand erect and become a valiant defender of the community. And later he was able to answer the riddle of the Sphinx, which was a symbol that he had passed his initiation. Later, he became a king and was married to the king's daughter. Yeah, his love and intuition, the feminine, were joined to wisdom, the masculine. However, some accounts depict a more dire result, namely that he married the queen who was his own mother, thus bringing upon his madness. This is the other side of the story, for the personality must either conquer and have love and wisdom wedded, or else defile the great divine mother, which means to use his acquired power for evil purposes. The Key of Destiny.
Thank you. So we begin to get some insight, that it's process of purification and then initiation. Any thoughts or questions? Okay, next up we have an in-depth analysis from Eliphas Levi on Oedipus' encounter with the Sphinx. Now that we have context of his whole life, this zones right in on his encounter with the Sphinx. The language here is a little archaic, so you have to really pay attention, but the content is worth it, to my mind. Anyway, can we get a reader, please?
Catherine, can you read that for us, please?
Yes, I'm rusty. I couldn't find the unmute. Thereafter, Oedipus meets with the Sphinx, that symbol of symbols whose unchanging form expresses the one dogma of the great universal mystery. How is the tetrad changed into the duad and explained by the triad? In more common but more emblematic terms, what is that animal which in the morning has 4 feet, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening? Philosophically speaking, how does the doctrine of elementary forces produce the dualism of Zoroaster, while it is summarized by the triad of Pythagoras and Plato? What is the ultimate reason of allegories and numbers, the final message of all symbolisms? Oedipus replies with a simple and terrible word, which destroys the Sphinx and makes the diviner king of Thebes. The answer to the enigma is man. Unfortunate. He has seen too much, and yet through a clouded glass. A little while, and he will expiate his ominous and imperfect clairvoyance by a voluntary blindness, and then vanish in the midst of a storm, like all civilizations, which, each in its own day, shall divine an answer to the riddle of the Sphinx without grasping its whole import and mystery. Returning to the fable of Oedipus, the crime of the king of Thebes was that he failed to understand the Sphinx, that he destroyed the scourge of Thebes without being pure enough to complete the expiation in the name of his people. The plague, in consequence, avenged speedily the death of the monster, and the king of Thebes, forced to abdicate, sacrificed himself to the terrible manes of the Sphinx, more alive and voracious than ever when it had passed from the domain of form into that of idea. Oedipus divined what was man, and he put out his own eyes because he did not see what was God. He divulged half of the great arcanum, and to save his people, it was necessary for him to bear the remaining half of the terrible secret into exile and the grave. Transcendental.
Okay. Yeah, transcendental magic. So this is, a deep dive into the symbolism here. And, I find it really interesting because he suggests that he gave the exoteric answer, to the Sphinx, the simple, very physical answer, right? But that there is he divulged half of the great arcanum, the lower half, right? And that it was necessary for him to do that, but it was also necessary for him as an initiate to retain the higher half, the understanding of the meaning, which he describes here somewhat, where he's talking about the tetrad changed into the duad and explained by the triad. This just gives us a glimpse into the true mystery of the Sphinx, right? He had to retain that as a new initiate. So it's, it just shows you how deep these allegories go and how many keys, progressive keys it takes to open them to understanding. Any thoughts about this? questions?
Yes, Tia's had her hand up for a little bit. Go ahead, Tia.
I was just gonna say, if you could go back to the previous slide, Francis.
Mhm.
Talking about the whole notion of Oedipus and him marrying his king's daughter, and this being sort of an initiate journey. I mean, it could be the concept of the development and the birth of consciousness, and the fact that, the three aspects, life, quality and appearance,
Mm.
or, he at some point, I think, had reached his level of attainment and could go no further. So, he tries to he marries his mother, which is consciousness, I would say, connected to sort of the physical aspect,
Mhm.
but unable to synthesize the three aspects, symbolized by the fact that he blinds himself. So he doesn't function as a soul infused personality because he doesn't reach that point of synthesis. He's stopped there.
Yeah, which, by the way, that always happens.
Yeah.
That's a stage on the path. There's a blindness connected with initiation, and you just very well described the nature of that blindness, which is what lies beyond, what the next step is to be. That's, it's not until I think the seventh initiation that the initiate doesn't experience a blindness connected with the further stage. So yeah, some good thoughts there. Thank you, Tia. Anyone else? It's great stuff to my mind. Much more meaningful than the particulars of how and whether the robbers got into the pyramid. I mean, that's interesting from one point of view, but we're sort of back on terra firma for this class with this kind of stuff. Okay. Finally, we have a somewhat tongue-in-cheek comment from HPB. She's real good at those. Can we get a reader, please?
Greg, can you read that for us, please?
By the way, this is maybe the most famous painting of this encounter by one of the great realists, Ingres, French painter of the 19th century. Yes, reader, please.
Okay. If the Sphinx threw herself into the sea and perished, it is not because Oedipus had unriddled the secret of the ages, but because by anthropomorphizing the ever spiritual and the subjective, he had dishonored the great truth forever. Therefore, we can give it only from its philosophical and intellectual planes, unlocked with 3 keys respectively. For the last 4 keys of the 7 that throw wide open the portals to the mysteries of nature are in the hands of the highest initiates and cannot be divulged to the masses at large, not in this, our century at any rate. The occult sciences, or rather the key, which alone explains the jargon in which they are expressed, cannot be divulged. Like the Sphinx who dies the moment the enigma of its being is guessed by an Oedipus, they remain occult only as long as they are unknown to the uninitiated.
Okay, so you see the similarity of her perspective here to what was given us by Levi, right? That is just the lore that is given. She adds the kind of joke that, the Sphinx was so distraught on giving, such a banal answer that she threw herself into the sea, right? But the idea is, and here she really details the idea of the keys, that there are 7 keys and that they are layered vertically, you could say, and that they require consciousness in order to reveal them, right? And so at the next level of consciousness, you will be able to interface with this myth and at a new and higher level. Okay, back to the text. There is still another answer to the riddle of the Sphinx, an answer best revealed by a consideration of the Pythagorean values of numbers. The 4, the 2, and the 3 produce the sum of 9, which is the natural number of man and also of the lower worlds. Okay, 9 is the number of the lower worlds because the sum of 2, 3, and 4 doesn't include the 1. Add in the 1 and the sum becomes 10, the sacred tetractys, which reduces back to 1 and in fact is the demonstration of unity in the outer world. We'll be taking a deeper dive into this subject of numerology in a chapter in the Sacred Teachings entitled Pythagorean Mathematics. It's coming up in 3 or 4 chapters. Let's see here. Could we get a reader for this, please?
Fred, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. Trying to see what you want me to read. Oh, here you go. To the duad, the Pythagoreans gave the appellation audacity, matter, the cause of dissimilitude, interval between multitude and the monad, ascribing it to Diana and some other deity, to fate and death. The triad was considered by them to be intellect, the origin of virtue, and belonged to just Saturn and many other divinities. They held that the power of the duad subsisted in the 4. 4 was particularly connected with Mercury as the deity who imparted intellectual gifts to man. 3 they looked upon as embracing all human things. No God, says Pythagoras, who is number and harmony. The human soul, according to that philosopher, was number moving itself, and some styled number the father of gods and the opinion respecting the 9 was that there could be no number beyond it, and that it circulates all numbers within itself, as is evident from the retrogression of numbers. For their natural progression is as far as 9, after which their retrogression takes place. 10 becomes once more the manners and customs of the ancient Egyptians.
Thanks, Fred. So you can see, a good explanation of why 9 represents the lower world, right? Because it circulates all numbers, which have to do with the manifested worlds in their various conditions within itself. And so it's inherent to the manifested realm, right? Okay.
Francis?
Yeah.
We have a comment from Anne Veronica. She says, I was thinking the destruction of the Sphinx is also symbolic. There is always a destruction before going to the higher path. And I also think that the blindness is a symbolic way to look inside the blind, as you said before, an initiation.
Very good. Yeah, absolutely. Taking those separately, the idea of the phoenix is in a way true of any destruction, especially of a mythological creature, that really it's a change of form, a transformation, right? And so the new perspective, which is gained through the answering the riddle, also changes who who is asking that riddle, because it then must become that being who can provide, in a sense, the next level, the riddle for the next level. So that's good. In terms of the physical blindness, absolutely. When you're blind to the outer, you become aware of the inner. And that's a very good point. I'm glad you brought it up because it's really germane to this particular myth. Thank you. Was that Tia, I think, wasn't it?
No, that was Anne Veronica.
Oh, Anne Veronica. Thank you, Anne Veronica. Yeah. Okay. So next up, the 4 represents the ignorant man, the 2, the intellectual man, and the 3, the spiritual man. Infant humanity walks on 4 legs, evolving humanity on 2, And to the power of his own mind, the redeemed and illumined Magus adds the staff of wisdom. So it's not difficult to equate 4 with ignorance, though it certainly isn't its only meaning. It can also be a very high state that exists between the 5-pointed star and the triangle on the path of the initiate. But it can also represent the form aspect, right? The imprisoning cube or square. Nor is it difficult to equate 3 with spiritual man, as 3 represents the triad, the spiritual realms. Equating 2 with intellectual man is a bit more of a challenge, unless we consider the duality of lower and higher mind. Also, lower mind activity is the source of separation, of which the dyad is a symbol. If you have, if anybody has more ideas on this, jump in there. You're talking about nothing less than the riddle of the Sphinx in this, right? Back here in this area where he's talking about we get probably the closest recognition, at least, of the riddle in this statement. How is a tetrad changed into the duad and explained by the triad? So this gives us a framework of approaching the riddle. Okay.
And Anne Veronica says about the number 9, I was reading today from MDR, the 9 was given to the Pleiades, the 7 sisters, plus the mother and the father.
Well, it would be, wouldn't it? It's the form aspect writ large. It's the cosmic influence on our solar system of the third principle, right? Of the form principle comes to us from the Pleiades, which in its ultimate expression is mind and manas. It's the source, you could say, of manas for this solar system. So yeah, it would be, even though we normally think of 9 Pleiades, 9 would certainly be associated with that constellation. Anyone else? Okay.
Okay.
Hang
Anne
on.
Veronica said,
Go ahead.
she says 3-4-5 makes a triangle with a 90-degree angle very important for the Pythagoreans.
Yes, I toyed with whether to include that at this point. That is the Pythagorean triangle, and it has many properties. That's 12. That's 12ness, which isn't being directly considered here, but we will certainly be talking about it in future, right? And you could assign the properties of the tetrad, the triad, and the dyad or duad. You could qualitatively, you could assign them to those 3 numbers, 3, 4, and 5. But it's a little deeper dive than is indicated here. We will get to it. We'll be approaching, and actually I think in some previous webinars we've taken a look, and we will again when we get to that section of Pythagoras. Okay, next up, the Sphinx is therefore the mystery of nature, the embodiment of the secret doctrine, and all who cannot solve her riddle perish. To pass the Sphinx is to attain personal immortality. Well, actually, from the consciousness perspective, there is no personal immortality, since immortality only functions in the realm of the impersonal, right? But, given that, the mathematical link to the Sphinx is the tetractys. And so all the mechanics of manifestation that are inherent in the tetractys which is the mystery of nature, also apply to the Sphinx.
Okay, we have a hand up. It's Tia. Go
Yes.
ahead.
I was gonna say, thinking about the journey again from the tetrad to the through the duad, and then what is the third one? The triangle.
The triad, yeah, the
Yeah,
triad.
I mean, could that also be interpreted as representative of the first three initiations, or initiation moving from the
Okay.
personality to being? And in order to be in the state of pure being as a soul, you have to go over the opposites. You surmount the opposites, which are the duad.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
like it. Yeah, that dyad, first of all, the quaternary, right? The lower personality. That's the 4 in the morning, right? And then the dyad would be that dual awareness of personality soul. So first of all, it's pure personality. Then it's the duad of of personality soul, and that's like what I was saying before, the lower and higher mind as the dyad, right? And then of course the triadal consciousness, you start coming into awareness of that at the third initiation. So I like it, Tia. You should write a book. Okay, anyone else? Yeah, it's a good theosophical foray into this riddle, what Tia just suggested. You always have to understand, HPB's idea of the 7 keys, that if you get something that resonates, then you've turned a key. That doesn't mean that you solve the riddle. It's because it's so multi-leveled, but it means that you have begun the process, right? Go ahead, BL, what were you going to say?
Greg says leading to the 3 in 1/1 in 3, the triad.
Leading to the 3 in 1.
The 3 in 1
Oh, the 3 in 1.
and the 1 in 3, the triad.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Well, see, that's what you get with a tetrad always, it's the manifestation of unity. That's what the tetrad is. Just as the triad is the vehicle of the monad meaning one or unity. So that's the reason that the tetrad is inherently considered sacred, right? But as a vehicle for the higher, the one in and of itself is unmanifest. Yeah, good, Greg. Anyone else? Okay, next up, the Sphinx is therefore the mystery of nature, the embodiment of the secret doctrine. Wait a minute, I said this tonight. Okay. Next comes the subsection on the Sphinx, on the physical monument called the Sphinx. This is really different, right? We've been looking at this illustration of a Greek myth about Oedipus and the Sphinx. And now we go to the other idea of the Sphinx, not the same and yet related, okay, which is that great Egyptian monument called the Sphinx. Here are some photos just to orient you of this extraordinary ancient monument. Here's 2 more. I always love these old photos of tourists. At this point, as you can see, the Sphinx was still buried up to about this level. I believe, at least the lower part wasn't excavated. In ancient times, like hundreds of years ago, it was buried up to its neck. And we'll talk about a dream that led to the excavation of the Sphinx, actually by a pharaoh. Okay, so could we get a reader, please?
Yvonne, can you read that for us, please?
Sure. The Sphinx, although the Great Pyramid, as Ignatius Donnelly has demonstrated, is patterned after the antediluvian type of architecture, examples of which are to be found in nearly every part of the world. The Sphinx, who is typically Egyptian. The stele between its paws states the Sphinx is an image of the sun god, Harmachis, which was evidently made in the similitude of the pharaoh during whose reign it was chiseled. The statue was restored and completely excavated by Thutmose IV as the result of a vision in which the god had appeared and declared himself oppressed by the weight of the sand about his body. The broken beard of the Sphinx was discovered during excavations between the front paws. The steps leading up to the Sphinx and also the temple and altar between the paws are much later additions, probably Roman, for it is known that the Romans reconstructed many Egyptian antiquities. The shallow depression in the crown of the head, once thought to be the terminus of a closed-up passageway leading from the Sphinx to the Great Pyramid, was merely intended to help support a headdress now missing.
Sorry, I muted myself. Okay, so first up, although the Great Pyramid, as Ignatius Donnelly has demonstrated, is patterned after an antediluvian type of architecture, examples of which are to be found in nearly every part of the world, the Sphinx, who is typically Egyptian. Ignatius Donnelly was the author of Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, a deep exploration of not only Atlantis, but also of the cultures that resulted from the immigration just before the Great Deluge. In this masterwork, he traces the origins of the pyramidal structure as used in these cultures. It's true that the Sphinx is quote unquote typically Egyptian, as you can see here. Though this doesn't mean in and of itself that it was built during the recognized historical Egyptian period. That's still an open question. Next, the stele between its paws states the Sphinx is an image of the sun god Harmachis, which was evidently made in the similitude of this pharaoh during whose reign it was chiseled. So here's the stele, also called the dream stele. And here's a close-up of this section that has survived erosion of its lower 2/3. Ra overshadows the pair of sphinxes and pharaohs beneath. Harmachis is an aspect of Ra. Next, the statue was restored and completely excavated by Thutmose IV as the result of a vision in which the god had appeared and declared himself oppressed by the weight of the sand about his body. Here's an account of the dream. It's kind of fun. And a translation of the upper part of the stele. Can we get a reader, please?
Okay, but hold on a second. We have a couple of comments here. And let me see. Greg says, wasn't there some speculation more recently that the face of the Sphinx was also meant to be the face of the pharaoh?
Oh, not only recently. It's pretty much considered. That's the standard Egyptological understanding that whenever this was constructed, that it represented that pharaoh. Philosophically, it actually also holds, as you'll see when we get into some analysis of that. Thanks, Greg.
And then Anne Veronica, she says, sorry, you say something and something else pops in my mind. There is the one unmanifested and the one manifested. The beginning of the Fibonacci sequence, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, which gives, by dividing the sequential numbers, all the more accurate numbers of the golden mean.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So the one, we were talking about unity and the triad, for instance, and the first one in the Fibonacci sequence would be that one unmanifested, and then you cross, I think there's a period, right? And then you have the next one. And that is the one inherent in all that follows. So initially that'd be the one within the triad, right? It's the unifying aspect of the manifested triad, right? Whereas the first one is the pure unmanifest unity of all life. Thanks for that, Anne Veronica. Anyone else?
No, not right now, but so you need a reader, right?
Oh, and besides, and also thanks, Anne Veronica. We're all glad that things keep popping in your mind. It makes class much more interesting. Okay, reader.
Okay, Laxman, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. The dream stele is also known as the Sphinx stele because it tells the story of the young prince Tutmosis, who falls asleep near the great Sphinx of Giza and dreams that the Sphinx promises him the throne of Egypt in return for Tutmosis, clearing the sand away from around it. Tutmosis did as he was instructed and went on to become the pharaoh Tutmosis IV. In gratitude, he promoted Re-Horemakhet above Amun-Re, dedicated a temple to Horemakhet, and placed the stele between the paws of the Sphinx to record the tale. It has been noted by some experts that the stele may not, in fact, date to the reign of Tutmosis. It is possible that it is a replacement for an earlier stele, or that it was placed there sometime after to enhance the reputation of either the pharaoh or the Sphinx itself. The stele is actually the lintel of a doorway from the mortuary temple of Khafre's pyramid.
Okay, so from what follows here is actually written on this stele or stele. Go ahead, continue.
Okay, thank you. Left-hand side, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, the lord of the two lands, Menkaperure Tutmosis, the appearance of appearances, bestowed with life, greeting the god with a Nemset vase spoken by the Sphinx. I give strength to the lord of the two lands, Tutmosis, the appearance of appearances. Middle, spoken by the Sphinx, I make it so that Menkaperure appears on the throne of Geb, and Tutmosis, the appearance of appearances, in the position of Atum. Right-hand side, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, the lord of the two lands, Menkaperure Tutmosis, the appearance of appearances, bestowed with life, making an offering of incense and a libation. Horemakhet says, I give strength to the lord of the two lands, Tutmosis, the appearance of appearances. Ancient Egypt Online.
Yeah, I find it really interesting that he's called the appearance of appearances, because we're talking about the third aspect, the outer world, right? But the pharaoh and those great ones who incarnate could, it's such a great appellation, the appearance of appearances, it's a very exalted term. And yet it's limited by the fact that is in the realm of appearances. It's very interesting to me. Yeah, it's hard to read, original Egyptian because it's meant, it's not meant as to be read in the usual way. It's more like an invocation or prayer. I saw a hand.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, just looking at the picture as it's the pictorial. I mean, it looks so much like the picture that you have here. No, you were we were on the right place. Yeah, there. It looks so much like the third eye. I mean, the Ajna Center.
Yeah.
And, thinking about the aspects of the third eye, it's food for thought when you go through the left side, the right side, and the middle. How it synthesizes and moves energy.
Yeah. If I can interpret what you just said, the third eye, when
The Ajna Center.
the
Yeah,
eye center
yeah.
is
Look.
you see unlike any other of the chakras, it has these two wing, what would you call them? Two
The petals, 90
petals.
states.
They're
90 states,
like
48 on each side. Yeah.
Yeah, so you have 48 on each side, that come out from the center. And you're right, I'd never thought of it that way, but and it's appropriate too, because that's the eye which allows you to see into the unseen realm, right? So that would be like the microcosmic reflection of this macrocosmic realm of Ra, which is the solar god, right? Which then demonstrates through this fundamental duality indicated by the two serpents, right? Very good. Thank you. Okay, anyone else? Okay, next. Let's see here. Next, the broken beard of the Sphinx was discovered during excavations between the front paws. Here's a piece of the broken beard, now in the British Museum. Its curved tip, we're told, you can't really see it here, identifies the wearer to be a god, whom the Egyptians called Horem Maket, Horus in the horizon. So it's if it's a pharaoh, it's the pharaoh in its god aspect. Next, the steps leading to the Sphinx and also the temple and the altar between the paws are much later additions, probably Roman, for it is known that the Romans reconstructed many Egyptian antiquities. Here's the altar between the paws of the Sphinx. In addition, there are Old and New Kingdom temple ruins near the Sphinx. There's been no definitive evidence that suggests that all three were built at the same time. Well, certainly the Old and New Kingdom temples weren't, but the Old Kingdom temple and the Sphinx, there's still no evidence that they were built at the same time, because many hold that the Sphinx was built much, much earlier. It's an open question. And finally, the shallow depression in the crown of the head, once thought to be the terminus of a closed-up passageway leading from the Sphinx to the Great Pyramid, was merely intended to help support a headdress now missing. So here are two photos of this depression, one showing it open, this is a much older photograph, and the other closed. So you can see this guy is standing in it, so it's about a chest-high depression. It was just meant to support a now missing headdress.
Francis?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm having trouble with my chat. I'm losing messages. But anyway, Greg says, symbolically, you could almost assign the left-hand side to the meaning behind the one. The middle can also be associated with two, which second ray a quality of unity in diversity. And lastly, in third becomes the quality of the symbolism of the three giving us the triad and third aspect as you described.
Yeah, that's viable. The only thing I would change would be the from left to right. That's a very Western way of looking. In the East, they go from right to left, and the right side is considered the sacred side. But yes, the idea is sound. So Next up, could we get a reader, please?
Sorry, lost my thing there. Metal rods have been driven into the Sphinx in a vain effort to discover chambers or passages within its body. The major part of this Sphinx is a single stone, but the front paws have been built up of smaller stones. The Sphinx is about 200 feet long, 70 feet high, and 38 feet wide across the shoulders. The main stone from which it was carved is believed by some to have been transported from distant quarries by methods unknown, while others assert it to be a native rock, possibly an outcropping, somewhat resembling the form into which it was later carved. The theory once advanced that both the pyramid and the Sphinx were built from artificial stones made on the spot has been abandoned. A careful analysis of the limestone shows it to be composed of small sea creatures called nummelites.
Okay, so we're back to physical description, but it's relatively brief. First of all, metal rods have been driven into the Sphinx in a vain attempt to discover chambers or passages within its body. Actually, the Egyptian Department of Antiquities in Egypt, headed by Zahi Hawass, has made it illegal to use metal rods or drills for probing in both the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid. So again, this belonged to an earlier time. But there are now much better ways to determine the existence of hidden rooms or voids. The most spectacular find of late is the discovery of a huge void above the Grand Gallery. They found nothing in the Sphinx, by the way. Through a technique of measuring the differences in the trajectory of cosmic particles called muons as they pass through the pyramid. So it's a very scientific method, but effective. So the measured results translate into an image as shown here. Here's a close-up. So there's something up there right above the Grand Gallery, some void, some space. Now, it's not this muon, the science of measuring the difference of trajectory of cosmic particles is not advanced enough that it gives us exact proportions. So we don't know what's here. This is still quite a distance. If this is 40 meters, 120 plus feet, you're probably looking at 30 meters to get up into this void. It's very unlikely that they're going to, dig a hole up into that space, right? So maybe in future, this science will become more perfected and it will actually allow us to map out what it looks like up there. Kind of fascinating though, isn't it? This is particularly interesting because no space that size could survive without it having been designed to survive the downward pressure of the stones above it. So it's not just some hollowed out space, like that occurred as a result of working on the pyramid. It would have fallen in on itself if it was that. It is a built space of some kind. We just have no idea what. And who knows, there may be something in it since we found no passage to it. Okay.
Francis?
Yeah.
Catherine says, such a fascinating riddle, this physics of building.
Oh man. Yeah. It's, that's one reason it was called the only surviving and the eighth wonder of the ancient world, right? Because the technology to build such an edifice is just lost. We don't know how they did it, you know. Yeah, it's extraordinary. Okay, so next up, this idea about the Sphinx being a single stone, and then it gives the dimensions. The main stone is believed by some to have been transported from distant quarries by methods unknown, et cetera, et cetera. So it is now generally agreed that the main body of the Sphinx was carved from the bedrock and has since been restored with layers of limestone rock. You can see, you know, these layers of limestone. We can see both in this photo. Here's an aerial view. Quite a thing, really. Next. The theory once advanced that both the pyramid and the Sphinx were built from artificial stones made on the spot has been abandoned. A careful analysis of the limestone shows it to be composed of small sea creatures called nummulites. Here's an article from fossilhuntress.blogspot.com describing these nummulites. It's interesting enough to give it a read. So you see these little guys here, all of this limestone is made up of compressed little lives called nummulites. Could we get a reader, please?
Andrea, can you read that for us, please?
Yes, I can. Oops, hold on. Sorry about this. Okay, come back to me. Good.
Okay.
The limestone from Tura was the finest and whitest of all the Egyptian quarries and chosen for the facing stones for the Great Pyramid. It is interesting in that it is made up almost entirely of nummulites, a single-celled organism. Nummulites are the calcareous chambered shells of extinct forms of marine amoeba-like organisms, protozoans or protists, called foraminifera, that accumulated in huge quantities during the early Cenozoic. They look very much like little white round crackers or cross-sections of plants with their concentric rings. Imagine millions of them with their wee calcium carbonate skeletons living, dying, and sinking to the seafloor. Over time, these little skeletal remains gathered in layers, pressure and time doing the rest. They became cemented together and helped form some of the most beautiful limestones we have today. It is remarkable to think that the Great Pyramid of Egypt, the only remaining wonder of the ancient world, is made up of teeny tiny single-celled fossils.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Okay, next up, reader, please.
Denise, can you read that for us, please? Oops, guess we lost Denise. Okay, Eleonora, can you read that for us, please? Eleonora?
Okay, I can try. The popular supposition that the Sphinx was the true portal of the Great Pyramid, while it survives with surprisingly tenacity, has never been substantiated. P. Christian presents this theory as follows, basing it in part upon the authority of Imobliscus. The Sphinx of Giza, says the author of the Traité des Mysteries, served as the entrance to the sacred subterranean chambers in which the trials of the initiate were undergone. This entrance, obstructed in our day by sands and rubbish, may still be traced between the forelegs of the crouched colossus. It was formerly closed by a bronze gate, whose secret spring could be operated only by the Magi. It was guarded by public respect, and a sort of religious fear maintained its inviolability better than armed protection would have done. In the belly of the Sphinx were cut out galleries leading to the subterranean part of the Great Pyramid. These galleries were so artfully crisscrossed along their course to the pyramid that in setting forth into the passage without a guide through this network, one ceaselessly and inevitably returned to the starting point.
Thank you. Okay, so all of this you have to take with a grain of salt, right? These are basically, very attractive ideas that people have turned into belief systems, you could say. So among the more evocative of the stories concerning a passage between the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid is given by Edgar Cayce. I have a lot of respect for Edgar Cayce, who made the claim during a client reading that there is a yet undiscovered passage between the two edifices that leads to a, quote, hall of records containing the history of Atlantis. So whether or not such a passage exists, there is without question a philosophical connection between the Sphinx and the pyramids. Could we get a reader, please?
And Veronica?
Hello.
Hi.
Happy New Year, Francis.
And to you.
Are
Oh,
you going to read?
she
You're
might-
muted.
Sorry, I muted myself. That which the ancients understood by the four elements is no wise signified simple bodies, but rather the four elementary manifestation of the one substance. These modes were represented by the Sphinx, its wings corresponding to air, the woman's breast to water, the body of the bull to earth, and the lion's claws to fire. The one substance thrice threefold in essential mode and tetradic in the form of manifestation. Such is the secret of the three pyramids, triangular in respect of their elevation, square at the base, and guarded by the Sphinx. In raising these monuments, Egypt attempted to erect the Heraclean pillars of universal science.
Yes, thank you, Veronica. So, there's a good argument for the connection here between the Sphinx and the pyramids, right? Having to do with the four primordial elements. And we'll be getting into how the pyramid demonstrates those primordial elements when we get into the next section. Any thoughts, questions? Okay, next up, could we get a reader?
Martha G, can you read that for us, please?
Unfortunately, the bronze door referred to cannot be found, nor is there any evidence that it ever existed. The passing centuries have wrought many changes in the Colossus, however. Let's see, sorry, I lost my place. And the original opening may have been closed. Nearly all students of the subject believe that subterranean chambers exist beneath the Great Pyramid. Robert Ballard writes, the priests of the pyramids of Lake Maris had their vast subterranean residences. It appears to me more than probable that those of Giza were similarly provided, and I may go further. Out of these very caverns may have been excavated the limestone of which the pyramids were built. In the bowels of the limestone ridge on which the pyramids are built will yet be found. I feel convinced ample information as to their uses. A good diamond drill with 200 or 300 feet of rods is what is wanted to test this, and the solidarity of the pyramids at the same time. See the solution of the pyramid problem.
Okay, there's a lot of problems with this hypothesis. Although Robert Ballard's handsomely bound solution of the pyramid problem does contain this passage, it is mainly a treatise on ancient land survey with dozens of fascinating illustrations and charts tabulating precise measurements of length and angle. Next, could we get a reader? I'm not going to
Okay.
spend time on this because there's a lot of problems with his hypotheses.
Okay, but first, I want to say that Anne Veronica, referenced the previous conversation or previous slide, says all the elements are there and a lot of the signs there with the Sphinx.
Yeah. Exactly. Right, where was that? That was being described. Is that here? I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, it was talking
Yeah,
about the
here it is.
elements and mhm.
Its wings corresponding to air, women's
Right.
breaths to water, etc. And we could trace this astrologically quite easily, really. Yes, a good point.
And then Martha S., and I guess because we're all experiencing little problems here, says we are in Mercury retrograde. So, haha. Speaking of Martha S., can you read that for us, please?
There we go. There's my unmute button.
See, Mercury retrograde. You were right.
Mr. Ballard's theory of extensive underground apartments and quarries brings up an important problem in architectonics. The pyramid builders were too far-sighted to endanger the permanence of the Great Pyramid by placing over 5 million tons of limestone and granite on any but a solid foundation. It is therefore reasonably certain that such chambers or passageways as may exist beneath the building are relatively insignificant, like those within the body of the structure, which occupy less than 1/1600th of the cubic contents of the pyramid.
Okay, so the architectonic perspective is perhaps the most convincing argument against there being extensive underground chambers beneath the Great Pyramid. I mean, possibly, as Edgar Cayce suggests, there is a Hall of Records. It wouldn't have to be that large. For even the small, cramped passages in the Great Pyramid, as you see here, this is only a 28-inch square passage, 28-inch tall and wide, right? Nonetheless, they have thick surface stones making up the entire ceiling in order to keep from collapsing. So the idea that there's, grand ballrooms beneath the pyramid just is not, architectonically possible, right? Even though it's incredibly popular theory. Now they could be off to the side of the pyramid, like between the Sphinx and the pyramid. It's, that is still theoretically possible. Okay.
Francis?
Yeah.
Greg says also might have to consider that 2 to 10,000 years of sediment, and there might be chambers deep below at the current time when the surface currently exists.
Okay, so I'm not sure what he means by that.
Greg, you want to clarify?
I guess what I was really trying to say is today's surface shows where we meet the Sphinx, there might be a sediment from the current time that has been filled in to the previous time between 2,000 and 10,000 years ago. So
Yeah.
there could be deep underneath there because of all the sediment that's been gathering.
Right, I see what you mean. And, there's been, like almost all the study from a scientific perspective has been done since this book was written. They have, the tools at their disposal now are extraordinary. And they've basically determined that the Sphinx is solid. They've been able to put up instruments, those muon detecting cosmic particles, that show that it's solid. Now, there is, of course, it's difficult to apply that to the ground, to any depth at all, right? And so that still remains unknown. But they have, in the excavation recent excavation of the Sphinx and the pyramid, taken it down to what they think was the level of both of those monuments at the time it was constructed. Okay.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was saying, is that they've taken it down to the level is huge, because I mean, the pictures that you were showing, I was having trouble too, because what are the directions? But that's just aside. Is the head of the Sphinx facing east, or is it facing west? And then all that other stuff. But anyway, that's just an aside, because there also is there's magnetic, the ley lines are probably very potent in that area. So, and that they say that a lot of these monuments in Mexico and all across the world were built on specific ley lines, where they were really aligning with different galactic or star positions. And so that also adds to it.
Yeah, there's no doubt that these were envisioned by, the hierarchy, and were put into place by some great 7th ray Lord of Wisdom, who was incarnate at that time, and would have had direct awareness, true intuition as to the placement, the alignment, and all this. And the miracle is in the fact that it was so, that it was realized that original vision was actually realized in the outer world, Yeah, thank you, Greg. Okay, let's see.
Okay.
Yes.
We got several more comments. Okay, so Catherine says, I'm not great at this stuff, but some contend that these passages and structural elements are cosmic catchment functions rather than having an engineering purpose. And she asks for your thoughts on that.
Well, it depends, there have been a lot of study that suggests that the ascending, the descending passages, and the Great Gallery were specifically aligned, especially to the stars that come into alignment through the North Star, right? And in fact, there's been a lot of work, and we looked at this at the last webinar, a lot of speculation as to when the pyramid was built, based on what you're talking about, the catchment of the energy, you could say, of these stars, because it's just because these passages are closed off to the outside of the pyramid doesn't mean that they can't channel that energy down through these passages. So there's been a lot of particular hypotheses as to the construction of the pyramid, most specifically around 10,600 BC, and then the other one being 69,000 BC, and specifically based on alignment with the star Vega, which also brought in all kinds of other alignments through the air shafts, etc. So I agree with you. I think that's the fundamental purpose, certainly not just, to be functional passageways. It's very much its secondary purpose. Okay, anyone else?
Yes, Yvonne asks, is the passage down or across this image?
Down.
And am I looking at steps? Are those the rods going across? Are those steps? If that is down, is that
Those
like
are under this thing that you see here?
Yeah, it looks like railroad ties.
Metal and boards. That's all new. That's all
That's like steps to go down into it?
Well, they're not steps.
Oh, the reinforcements, okay.
No, what it is it's allowed for people to more safely descend this passage, but the bottom of this looked just like the side. It's just faced stone, and then they put the boards and the rails on top. They're not steps. It looks like steps here, but it's just an incline. I think it's something like 26 or 28 degrees incline. I think it's 26.
And you say this is 28 inches square.
I believe that's correct.
Okay, but isn't too big.
Oh, it's not big at all. I went down this descending passage. It's really long. It's like the length of a football field to get down it. Something like 300 meters to get down, all the way down. And, you really have to steel yourself to keep going, because it seems like you're going to the very depths of the earth, when you're going down there. That's the subjective sense, is that you're just going forever because you're crouched in a very uncomfortable way, and you're to go down, right? But
Thanks for doing that for us.
yeah, sure. Yeah, you don't have to now, right? As a group, I bring that to the group. Okay, anyone else? Okay, let's see what's next. Yeah, can we get a reader, please? We're going to get through this. Well, we're not going to get through this. Real close. Can we get a reader, please?
Okay. Greg, can you read that for us, please?
Sure. The Sphinx was undoubtedly erected for symbolic purposes at the instigation of the priestcraft. The theories that the uraeus upon its forehead was originally the finger of an immense sundial, and that both the pyramid and the Sphinx were used to measure time, the seasons, and the precession of the equinoxes are ingenious, but not wholly convincing. If this great creature was erected to obliterate the ancient passageway leading into the subterranean temple of the pyramid, its symbolism would be most appropriate. In comparison with the overwhelming size and dignity of the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx is almost insignificant. Its battered face, upon which may still be seen vestiges of the red paint with which the figure was originally covered, is disfigured beyond recognition. Its nose was broken off by a fanatical Mohammedan, lest the followers of the prophet be led into idolatry. The very nature of its construction and the present repairs necessary to prevent the head from falling off indicate that it could not have survived the great periods of time which have elapsed since the erection of the pyramid.
Thank you, Greg. So first, the Sphinx was undoubtedly erected for symbolical purposes at the instigation of the priestcraft. The priestcraft associated with the Sphinx practiced in the adjacent Sphinx temple. Yeah, I have that here. You can see their focus was on the dual deity Har-Maku, also called the double Horus, who represented the, quote, son of the two horizons. This deity was associated with Libra, the scales, as well as the tortoise who emerges from the waters of chaos. Maku was the ancient Egyptian name of both the horizon and the equinox, and was the most ancient of the solar gods. And could we get a reader, please, for this?
Karen, can you read that for us, please?
All this time was perfected when the sun god was acknowledged as chief ruler. He was the true Kronos in place of Sothis, Anup, Shu, Seb, and Tot, who receded to secondary and subordinate positions, or as in the case of Sut, were degraded altogether. The peons of exaltation raised to this the one true God, who at last became first of the first, can be heard in all of the later religious literature. It is said of the Pharaoh assimilated to the sun. His Majesty went sailing as the image of Har-Maku, for lo, he took possession of that land. He obtained it for the time of the sun.
Okay, yeah, I comment on some insight into this deity that was worshipped by those who built their temple next to the Sphinx. Again, we don't know that they were built at the same time, but there certainly is an association here. Okay, that's it for today. We'll pick up next month. My guess is it's going to be 5 weeks since we're on the 1st of January here. When's
Nope.
no? When is it?
Nope, it's going to be 4 weeks. We have a new moon conflict, I believe. So the next Stoa is actually going to be the 29th of January.
Oh, so we dropped the first Sunday thing. We had to pull it back. Okay.
Yes, we did. We had to deconflict. We have so many things going on. But
fine.
of course, before that, on the 15th of January, we have the next secret doctrine. And your secret teachings is in there somewhere, right?
Second and fourth Sundays, and I think
Yeah, but I think they had to mess with that for
okay. It sounds like what you're going to need to do.
13 January. It's 13 January.
Okay, good. And that is the next webinar, right? Yeah.
Yes.
That'll be our next webinar together if you're doing, all the webinars. Okay, good. If you have any doubt, you can always go to morifederation.com, and the 3 series that I host are in the upper left-hand corner. And you can always find out the dates if you have any question about it. So, all right, you all, thanks very much, and we'll see you on the 13th. Bye-bye.
Goodbye,
Thank
everybody.
you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to read some chats here now that I have a chance.
Okay. I'll let you.
Thank you.
I see a whole bunch of thank yous and
Thank you.
And Happy New Year's and all that.
yes.
So grateful.
So BL, is there any time changes for Europe, for us, that we need to be aware of?
Not for January. The
Okay.
times change in March.
In March, okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.